Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas, here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us again. I want to re-thank Colin Allred for coming out this morning and this afternoon and speaking with us. It was a real pleasure. We have another very important, and I am very grateful for him to come out and talk to us today, Mr. Brian Cuban, who is, of course, an attorney and an author. We're going to be talking about his books in a few minutes. Brian's also, been practicing here in the Dallas area for a period of time. He's also the brother to Mark Cuban, yes, who's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. Brian, introduce yourself to the folks, and let's just talk about you.
Great. It's great to be here, Eric, and I no longer practice. Okay, so let's make that clear. I no longer practice law. I always joke when I speak. I say, well, I haven't been disbarred. I haven't been suspended, but it wasn't for a lack of trying.
That's right.
In my journey, which is one that could have easily ended up that way.
Yeah.
I've lived in Dallas for over 30 years. I am a graduate of Penn State and the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. I am licensed in Texas. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I was born in 1961, so a baby boomer.
Yeah.
I grew up with three brothers, I grew up with two brothers. I'm the middle of three.
Three of you guys.
Mark, as we know, the Mavericks and Shark Tank is the oldest.
Yeah.
And then we have a younger brother, Jeff. Our father, who is still alive, 92, a veteran of the Pacific and the Korean War. And my mom, who still lives in the house I grew up in Pittsburgh. Yeah. Growing up, it was interesting. I was very shy, the classic middle child syndrome. Mark is the firstborn, which is what you might have expected for the firstborn. He was very outgoing, very entrepreneurial, selling garbage bags door to door, selling this door to door. Jeff, the youngest, was a nationally ranked wrestler where we grew up in Mount Lebanon, PA, a jock, the beer parties, the dates, the prom. I was brutally shy, and I internalized anything negative said to me and wore it like a skin-tight suit. I was a heavy kid. And unfortunately, I also had a difficult relationship with my mom. And it's important to talk about this because when I talk to lawyers and non-lawyers who are struggling, we all bring the baggage of our lives to the game, whatever that may be, right? Whatever our job is, whether we're in school, whether we're a lawyer, whatever we do for a living, our life story follows us around. I had a very difficult relationship with her, and I want to make it clear that I don't blame my mother for the things I went through. Parents don't cause eating disorders. Parents don't cause addiction. There's a difference between cause and correlation.
Right.
But there was a lot of fat shaming in my household.
Yeah.
I used to love to eat Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can. I'd come home from school. My mom would come home, see me doing that, and say, if you keep eating that way, you're going to be a fat pig. These were the things her mother said to her. These were the things my great-grandmother said to my grandmother. Fat shaming in families is often handed down generationally. But as you might imagine, not understanding these things, I grew kind of depressed at hearing them, and I began to eat more and more, and I became a heavier kid. And as what often happens in school, it happened then, it happens now in a much more insidious way now with the internet, the bullying started. What happens when kids start seeing other kids, when you see someone change for what kids perceive in the negative, right?
Right.
The bullying started. The fat pig, Cuban, you need to go to Sears and get a bra. And I developed a very self-deprecating sense of humor to kind of shield myself against this bullying so kids wouldn't know how much it hurt. Because in my mind, they're validating everything my mom said to me about my body. And so I started making the self-deprecating jokes, and I really kind of started isolating and keeping to myself, but I wanted to be part of these kids so bad. This was before the age of the internet. So the popular kids in my mind were the kids I saw every day. The prom king, the prom queen, the first date, the first kiss, the holding hands, things I wanted so badly as symbols of self-worth. So, but they never came. But I kept hanging around these kids kind of on the outside, hoping one day they'd accepted me. It all culminated one day in what I call the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark had given me these shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. I know that sounds like a weird image, but this was in the era of Saturday Night Fever,
right.
when the disco craze was just getting started, so it wasn't abnormal then. But Mark wasn't a big guy, and the pants fit him fine. They were tight on me. I had to jump up and down to get them on, spray the water bottle, all the things. My butt looked like 15 cats back there. But I didn't care because I was going to wear these pants to school because my brother gave them to me. I love my brother. He loves me. We were very close then. We're very close now.
Right.
And they were a symbol of love from somebody I idolized and wanted to be like. I'm walking home from school one day with these kids, and I'm wearing the shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. They start making fun of them as usual. And the next thing I know, they're talking about how I am too fat to wear these pants, and they start pulling at them.
Yeah.
And they start pulling at them. Next thing I know, they're tearing them. The next thing I know, it's like wild dogs on a piece of bone.
Right.
And they tore the pants completely off me. They tore them into shreds and threw them in the street. And here, I'm a teenager. I'm a mile from home. I'm in my tighty whities. I have a shirt on, and I think I recall I had like those tube socks on and tennis shoes.
Yeah.
They went on like they had done the greatest thing ever. I go out in the street and I pick them up, a busy street. I put them over my underwear and I kind of waddle on home. People gawked, no one stopped. I got home, Eric, and I put those pants in the bottom of the trash can, put all the smelly stuff on top of them because I didn't want anyone in my family to know the shame that I felt, that I was this fat pig who couldn't stand up to bullies.
Yeah.
Because in my mind at that time, as a teenager, if they knew that, if Mark knew that, I would lose his love.
Yeah.
If my father knew that, I would lose his love. My younger brother wouldn't respect me. And in my mind, my mom didn't love me anyways. But I know she did. She was just repeating cycles of what was done to her back in those days as a young mother in the 70s.
Right.
I remember then really starting to see myself, my reflection in a different way. When I looked in the mirror, whether it was a car window reflection, in the mall seeing myself, I started to see this quote unquote fat pig, as my mom had called me and the boys had called me, who would never be loved, who would never go on a date, who would never be accepted by anyone, and who would be alone his entire life. I went on to Penn State University, and this is 1979, and I was so happy, Eric. I was so happy because I was going to get away from the bullies. I was going to get away from my mother. I was going to have a whole new life, a whole new Brian. It was freshman orientation. My father had just driven me up. I was in my dorm room, and it was a beautiful fall day. My father's unpacking, and I'm looking out this long rectangular window out into the parking lot. And I make eye contact with this curly brown-haired girl, and I start sweating. In 1.5 seconds, I sort of envision my entire life with this girl. We're going to get married, we're going to have children, we're going to have 2.5 children, right?
Right.
It wasn't a smile, it was a smirk. She turns to her friends, puts her hand over her mouth, cups her hands over her mouth, turns back to me and goes, "Ugly, ugly." I am not the first teenager who has had nasty things said to him, who has been bullied. It happens then, it happens now. But people respond in different ways or don't respond. Some kid may have said ugly back and given her a finger or whatever. Some kid may have responded another way. I was already broken. I was already somebody who had a terrible self-image, and I'm not blaming her for this. This is just where kind of the flip switched.
Yeah.
Kids are going to be kids, and it's not fun, but it is. It happens. I remember thinking at that point that my entire life was out of control. That once again, the cycle, I would never be loved. I would never have a girlfriend. Every girl I looked at was going to be thinking I'm a fat pig. How could I get control of my life, Eric? What did I have control over?
Yeah.
I had control over food. That was the only thing in my mind that I had control over. So I decided that I would begin to starve myself, and if I got thinner, I would be accepted by that girl, by the bullies, by the kids at school, and my life would change. I began to restrict my food intake and restrict, and without knowing it, in 1979, years before it was talked about for men or women, I had devolved into anorexia, anorexic behavior.
Yeah.
Anorexia would not even be brought into the pre-digital spotlight until singer Karen Carpenter would pass away from complications related to anorexia.
Right.
This was before that.
Yeah.
So you can't even say there was a stigma to a male having an eating disorder, because for there to be a stigma, there has to be a public conversation.
Right.
And there was none.
Yeah.
I did not know what it was called. I just knew that every time I lost a pound, was one more chance I would be accepted by that curly brown-haired girl.
Yeah.
Later that year, I transitioned into bulimia, which was the act of binging and purging. And every time I engaged in that act, I got this feeling of peace that came over me. That the next day everything was going to be okay. The next day I would love myself. The next day people would like me.
Yeah.
The next day my mom would love me. But when that few moments of peace went away, all of this shame swept into my stomach and filled that emptiness. The shame of engaging in an act that I did not understand but inherently felt shameful. Inherently was something I knew guys don't do.
Right.
Guys don't stick their fingers down their throat. Guys don't run to the community bathroom and turn on the showers and stuff and shut the door so the other kids don't hear you binging and purging. I didn't know what bulimia was.
Right.
I didn't know that word, but it just felt shameful. But I had to have that few seconds of peace again and again and again, because that's what got me through the day, knowing that I could have that few seconds of feeling okay. And so I began binging and purging all the time, every day, multiple times a day. Now I'm a guy with bulimia. I began to run and exercise obsessively. It's called exercise bulimia, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. I started running 10 miles a day, 20 miles a day, because if I didn't feel loved, I would just be by myself. And it made it easier with the binging and purging to, in my mind, maintain that low weight.
Right.
I went on into my sophomore year at Penn State, and I turned 21. It was 21 to drink then, and I think it is now, right?
Sure.
I discovered alcohol. If I couldn't have that feeling with and find acceptance of myself and acceptance with others in this pain and this self-hatred with my eating disorder and running, I would mute it with alcohol. And before I knew it, at Penn State, I was drinking every night, having to get drunk just to leave the house, showing up in class drunk and hungover. I remember back then, the closest I ever came to thinking about recovery was walking into a hamburger joint, and the 12-step groups would put out pamphlets called the 20 Questions. For Alcoholics Anonymous is the largest 12-step group.
All right.
So I'm looking at these pamphlets. I pull one out, and I'm drunk, of course. Answer this many questions. They're geared towards college students, and you just might be an alcoholic.
All right.
Do you black out? Do you miss class? And I'm answering all these yes. Boom, I'm just a college student, 2 points.
Yeah.
I'm doing what everyone else does. And even if I wasn't, this would threaten my survival.
Yeah.
This would threaten how I get through the day. I can't consider anything that threatens how I get through the day, which is running, binging and purging, and now drinking. Not quite the resume for success going out into the world. I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well, right?
Yeah.
The joke I tell you for it is I would have been the first person exchanging the mannitol for the cocaine in the police evidence room.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be alive to see the movie, but there'd be a movie. I was able to graduate from Penn State with okay grades because I was able to pull it together for a night or two before a test, pull an all-nighter, and get a decent grade. So I have to decide what I'm going to do with my life, and these behaviors aren't quite the resume for going into a police department or going in to do much.
Right.
They're a resume for just surviving for me. I'm sitting in the placement office at Penn State looking through police officers' jobs, and there are 2 kids sitting there, and they're talking about taking the law school admission test and going to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law, which I'm from Pittsburgh. Ding, 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 the bells start going off in my head, Eric. Not that I wanted to be a lawyer, not that I wanted to change the world, not that I wanted to make a lot of money. The bells went off in my head that going to law school would be an opportunity to binge and purge, run 20 miles a day, drink, and continue the same behavior that got me through college.
Right.
I gave no thought about studying, competition, or anything that had to do with a future beyond law school. I was looking in the moment of survival, which is not unusual with addictions and people dealing with substance use.
Right.
For many people, and it was for me, it's just about getting through the moment. getting through the day. And the dichotomy there and the irony is when you go into sobriety, that's exactly how sobriety begins. Getting through the moment,
Right.
getting through the day. So I decided to go to Pitt Law for those reasons. I did well enough on the LSATs to get into Pitt Law. And I repeated the exact same cycles at Pitt Law as I had at Penn State. I was drinking. I was going to class drunk. I did my trial moot court intoxicated. I was drinking just to leave the house. I was missing class and running instead. There is no doubt in my mind I did not attend the required number of classes to be allowed to graduate. So somebody just said, let them through. Or they weren't taking attendance.
Yeah.
But that is how I got through Pitt Law. And I remember Eric walking through 1L orientation, walking in the doors of Pitt Law, my first day at Pitt. I'm in the lobby of Pitt Law, and you walk in and there's this big lobby as I remember it. I haven't been back. And kids were talking, getting ready to go into the 1L orientation into one of the classrooms.
Right.
Where they were just going to parade people in front of us talking.
Right.
Probably somebody talking about substance use either, although I don't think they did that back then. This was 1983.
Yeah.
I remember looking around, and all I saw were bullies. All I saw were the curly brown-haired girl, all looking at me and saying, "You're a fat pig. You will never make it here. You will never be one of us. Just turn around and head out the door." And I turned around and headed out the door. I didn't go to 1L orientation, but I did go to law school, and I did make it through the 3 years, and I made it through as a terrible student. I made it through by the skin of my teeth, Pitt Law. I was not in any type of recovery. I was a quote-unquote alcoholic. I had 2 different eating disorders. It was the same thing as Penn State. But in law school, right, you can't just pull an all-nighter and do well on an exam. You actually have to pay attention and study.
Right.
I didn't do that, so I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I still have reoccurring dreams, Eric, about the dean of the law school going to graduation, which I didn't even go to, which is funny, because I was so ashamed. Just mail me the diploma.
Yeah.
It's okay. I didn't even go to it. I have reoccurring dreams about going to get my diploma and then pulling it back and saying, I really didn't graduate. Psych. And I wake up going like this.
Yeah.
That defined my time at Pitt Law. But I made it through. And then I have to make the same decisions again. What am I going to do with my life? I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't applying for jobs. Not that they'd have been beating down my door, with my grade point average, and I didn't care. I was just figuring out how I could once again survive.
Yeah.
So I took the Pennsylvania bar, and miraculously I passed it. I didn't find out I passed till I moved to Dallas. That was before I discovered cocaine. Mm-hmm. I took the bar, I packed up, I took the bar in July, 86, I packed up in Labor Day 1986, I moved to Dallas, Texas. I moved to Dallas, Texas because my brother Mark and my brother Jeff had already moved here. I could move with them, and the love of my brothers would make everything okay. It would make it easier to survive day to day. I would be with the people I knew who cared about me because no one else did, and I didn't care about myself. So I moved to Dallas, I moved in with Mark, and it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Because this was 1986, Mark's not even 30, my younger brother's not 30, they don't know anything about my issues. Yeah. They're out dating, they're on Greenville, having a good time, they're going this place, all the clubs. I fit right in. And then in the summer of 1987, and I hadn't taken the Texas bar yet, in the summer of 1987, I discovered the one thing in the bathroom of the Crescent Court Hotel in an old club called Bonash. I discovered the one thing that for 15 or 20 seconds, as long as that high lasted, I finally looked in the mirror and loved myself. I finally looked in the mirror and the girls loved me. I finally looked in the mirror and my mom loved me. That brown-haired curly girl loved me. I was law review.
Yeah.
I discovered cocaine in that bathroom. I did my first line in that bathroom in the Crescent Hotel. And I instantly became psychologically addicted to cocaine. Instantly. Not physically dependent. Those are 2 different things that people sometimes don't get.
Right.
But I would become physically dependent on it and go through a brutal detox when I've stopped. I became psychologically addicted to that feeling of loving myself, finally loving myself. The way I try to explain it, Eric, is when you have had a void in your stomach all of your life filled with nothing but self-hatred, and all of a sudden it is replaced with self-love after all these years, it was like nothing I had ever felt in my life. Who wouldn't want to have that again and again and again, even if it was artificial?
Yeah.
Even if it was artificial, I had to have it. I had to, because it was now not just about surviving. I love what I saw in the mirror.
Yeah.
That kid was okay. He wasn't bullied. So cocaine took over my life. It took over my life when I was studying for the Texas bar exam. It took over my life as a practicing lawyer. It took over my life through 3 failed marriages. It took over my life through a very near suicidal episode where my brothers came in my house. I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand and had actually put the gun in my mouth, trying to get good with the act of ending my life. I thought I was doing them a favor because I felt so worthless. It took over my life through jail, a trip to Sterrett, and alcohol as well. All these things defined who I was moving forward, not Brian, not a healthy self-image.
Yeah.
The first time I took the Texas bar exam out at Fort Worth, Texas, in a flea and roach-infested motel the weekend before the exam, my study aids were 3.5 ounces of cocaine, which we call an 8-ball, a liter of Jack Daniels, a liter of Tab, and borrowed Barbary study books that I'd never opened till that weekend. That was it. That's how little I cared about being a lawyer and how addiction had taken over my life. Even if I did care, it wouldn't have mattered. Obviously, I failed. I would fail it one more time. I would go to work as of counsel to lawyers we know. I was doing cocaine in the bathroom of that office. I was doing cocaine in the courtroom. I was taking cases that I was not competent to take, criminal cases, DWI, whatever I could take, because my alcohol and cocaine nut was getting high.
Right.
And so I began to walk ethical lines. We were talking about, it's a stereotypical term, and I use it lovingly, ambulance chaser, going to chiropractors' offices, sitting in chiropractors' offices. I remember one time I had a chiropractor. I would go and sit in her office with a briefcase full of contingency agreements and letters of protection, which, for the people who don't know what they are a lawyer's guarantee that the bills will get paid out of any settlement.
Right.
I was too afraid to try a case because I hated conflict. So I would sit there, and she would call me and say, "Hey, we have some accident people I'm working on." I would sit there and "Mr. Cuban, it's good to see you. Mr. Cuban is one of our top lawyers. Maybe you should talk to him." Then I'd go back in the room and sign them up as a client. This was my version of, quote unquote, the Paul Newman circling the funeral ads, ambulance chasing.
Oh.
And it was all wrapped around drugs and alcohol. And I joked before, and I say, I haven't been suspended or disbarred, but it wasn't for a lack of trying.
Right.
But I say it tongue in cheek, but when lawyers are dealing with these things, that is often a very real consequence.
Right.
Stealing money from trust funds, getting in, all kinds of ethical issues, malpractice,
Solicitation.
solicitation, yes, and it often revolves around substance use and problem drinking, drug use, and so.
Brian, would you mind if we could just a little bit in
Sure,
terms of
take it wherever you
backtracking?
want. I was just doing a monologue as you were.
No, absolutely. And I heard this. I had the opportunity to hear
Yeah.
you at SMU. It was one of the big reasons why I wanted to kind of have you on and tell your story. In terms
Sorry, I forgot we were being recorded. You can edit that out.
Take that.
You can edit that part out.
The chronology of what's happened to you. Were you working at the time when you came back from or actually to Texas, to Dallas? Were you working? You hadn't passed the bar.
Yes, I was. I started working for the city of Dallas in their property management company doing right-of-way work.
Okay.
In their property management office doing right-of-way work.
Right.
And it's funny, it was honorable work, and I was so ashamed of what I was doing that I wasn't a lawyer, that I would tell people I worked for the city attorney when I went out. I was just ashamed of what I was doing.
I think I read that, yeah.
And it was honorable work. And
Absolutely.
I was buying right-of-way for various drainage projects and stuff, and I made some of my first friends and lifelong friends working in the Office of Property Management for the city of Dallas, Texas.
Right.
that's when I was studying the first time for the bar. I eventually was basically asked to leave the City of Dallas Office of Property Management because I was studying when I should have been working. And not really, I was sitting in the lounge, with my Barbary books that I borrowed at the last minute starting to study. I really wasn't.
Yeah. But you had them out.
But I had them out. But it didn't look good, and eventually people started mentioning that I was sitting down in the lunchroom, with these books and not working. And they reviewed all my files and saw all the files that I hadn't done any work on. And so they asked me to leave, and I was fortunate to get another job real fast, and I began claims adjusting. And I started kind of a career at that point in claims adjusting. I started with Travelers Insurance, because they had what was called their serious injury unit, where they preferred people with law degrees, and it was for claims valued over $50,000.
Right.
So I started working for them, adjusting claims, and then I went on to a company known as Transport Insurance, and they were primarily at that time trucking.
Right.
And we were called litigation attorneys, but we were really just glorified claim managers. We weren't practicing, but they wanted their lawyers, they wanted their litigation managers to pass the bar. And so I was doing that, and I kind of enjoyed that, but I also really was doing a lot of cocaine and a lot of drinking at that time as well.
Oh.
I was using, we would do a lot of mediations, as so often happens in litigation management with large cases. You schedule mediations. I was scheduling these mediations around the country where all the cocaine was. And so I was more making my addiction fit around my job.
Yeah.
That eventually reached a point where I wasn't doing my job because of drugs and alcohol. But it also reached a point where I was also started on the side doing a lot of quote unquote of my chiropractor ambulance chasing. So by the time Transport Insurance told me that I was really no longer welcome, and they didn't fire me, but they made it clear that I was disappointing them.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I have enough cases here where I could go out on my own. So I went out on my own doing whatever I could get. And this is when I really got into I don't remember if it was unethical at that point. I think it is now. I think it is a violation of the rules now with the sitting in the chiropractor's office and doing it that way.
Yeah.
I'll have to hope the statute of limitations.
It has.
I don't remember it, but I was certainly walking the line.
Right.
And I was taking criminal cases. I was taking anything I could get because I needed money. I needed money to survive. I needed money to live.
Yeah.
I was pretending I was a successful lawyer.
At this point, where were you? Were you with your brother at that time? Living with your brother, or were you living on your own?
No, I was living on my own. And this was through, I had 2 failed marriages, both failing because of drugs and alcohol. How does that happen? Well, when you spend all of your energy trying to hide the ugliness you feel inside, trying to hide your substance use, trying to hide your drinking, that doesn't leave any room to allow yourself to be loved or to let love out.
Yeah.
You spend so much time wearing a mask because to let down that mask is to risk not that somebody says, I love you and want to help you, but I don't love you, you're a fat pig.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than risk that, the path of least resistance becomes when they say, you don't love me because you're not letting any feeling out, you're right, I don't.
Yeah.
I had 3 marriages and just like that, all following a similar pattern because of drugs and alcohol. So 3 failed marriages in that time. And then I went to work for an insurance company doing the same thing, and they went under. And it was around that time that it was January of 2000. I was in a health club. Remember the Premier Club?
I do.
On Central?
Yeah.
I was in the Premier Club, and my brother Mark worked out there, and I think he still may. I saw him in the locker room, and now I had no clients left because of drugs and alcohol. I was more busy. I was busy just partying.
Yeah.
And I really was struggling for a way to make a living because this job had ended. I'd let all my clients go when this job ended and it settled them all and closed them out. And I remember Mark saying, Mark asked me if I found a job yet. I said, no. He goes, don't worry, you'll come work for me. I just bought the Dallas Mavericks. This was January of 2000. It was just before, it was right around Christmas.
Yeah.
You'll just come work for me. Whew. Mark to the rescue again.
Yeah.
So I went to work for Mark, Mark put me in charge of his portion of the American Airlines Center. They were still building it at that time, and we were meeting in a construction room. Okay, because they were still at Union Arena. And we were meeting in this construction trailer, and I was with some of the most important people in Dallas, Tom Hicks and all these other very important people working out these issues with the construction of the American Airlines Center. I didn't have any construction knowledge, but Mark wanted me to report back to him. And I think Mark was really giving me a chance in his mind to pull myself up, to really get it together, come up to a challenge. But we know that that doesn't work with addiction, right? And they didn't know anything about this stuff. Right. I was showing up in those meetings, coked up, drunk, hungover, and as you might imagine, I failed at that miserably. Yeah. And it got to the point where Mark just started continuing to give me a paycheck, because at least he knew where I was. Because remember, I came close to killing myself in 2005 when Mark and Jeff took me down to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility. And after that, I was right back out. So this was a little later, but they kind of knew I was struggling. Yeah. And so in this 2001, he thought this would bring me up to the challenge. But I was right back out drinking and the failed marriages, now just, partying hanging out with only people who did what I do. And in 2005, the summer of 2005, I became so hopeless and despondent that I would never love myself, that I would never be loved, because in my mind, none of my ex-wives, they all love me, none of them love me, and my family didn't love me, and of course they did. They're trying to, give me opportunities. That I decided I was doing my family a favor by ending my life in the summer of 2005. Yeah. And it was close. It was really close. Mark and Jeff came into my room, and I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand that I had put in my mouth as kind of trying to get good with the act. There was cocaine everywhere. There was black market Xanax everywhere. I was literally, at this point, doing cocaine all night alone in my room, Xanaxing my way through the day, and then doing it all over again. A new way of surviving. Just so the days would just pass, because I didn't want to have to actually feel during the day. I wanted just each day to go by until I was no more, whatever that meant, till eternity. Yeah. They came in, they cleaned up the scene, they took the gun, they took me kicking and screaming in my first trip down to Green Oaks. They're trying to save my life. All I can think of is leave me alone. Yeah. We're in the room at Green Oaks, and there's a psychiatric attending physician, a psychiatric nurse, and my two brothers. I'm yelling at them, I'm blaming them for everything. I just want them to take me back home because I want to go back to what I know. The only thing I know, I want to go back to the only routine I know to get through the day. I don't want them interfering with that. They want me to live. They love me. They're trying to get me into residential treatment. I refused to go. Refused. Just leave me alone. So we did what I call the Cuban rehab. They say, well, take your car keys, stay in your house for 2 weeks, and everything's going to be okay. My only thought to that was, no problem, my cocaine dealer delivers. So they take me back home, they take my car keys. I'm so resistant to being told what to do that the moment they leave, I get a cab down to the car dealership and get a new set of car keys. Yeah. After doing some cocaine they didn't find. I had a couple thoughts at that time. Neither of them were about recovery. The biggest thought at that time was, now they know. I have to distance. That was the other thought. Not recovery. Now they know and I have to distance. Now I have to not go to functions, not see my nephews and nieces, not see my father, not hang around my brothers. Just hang out with the people that I party with, yeah, who accept me for who I am. A person with serious drug and alcohol issues. Right. But I didn't care. I didn't see that in them. I just saw people who were like me, which is not uncommon at all when it comes to addiction. Whatever your demographic is, whatever your job is, we tend to gravitate to the people who accept us in that realm. And so I was right back out. doing those things. It reached kind of an absurdity point in what I call the insanity of addiction in 2006. This was after I had met someone and started dating her. She knew nothing about my drug and alcohol issues. I had met her during one of my week-long cocaine and alcohol binges at the Candle Room on Knox Henderson. But she didn't know. She was a very moderate to minor drinker. She didn't do drugs. But I still was able to put on kind of the respectable mask, even though the periods I could wear it were shorter and shorter.
Right.
The Dallas Mavericks were going to the NBA championship in 2006 for the very first time. And this kind of illustrates how things got for me. How bad in 2005, sticking a gun in my mouth was bad, but really the quote unquote insanity of addiction and how I didn't care about family or anything. I just cared about feeding my addiction. The Mavs are going to the NBA championship for the very first time. And as you might imagine, that's a very exciting time for the city, for the team, and I was going to get some pretty good seats for those games. I called up Mark. He gave me a couple of very nice tickets, American Airlines Center. I didn't give them to my friends. I didn't sell them on eBay. Might think I would have done that. I traded them to my cocaine dealer for $1,000 in cocaine, scalpers prices. I didn't sell them on eBay because I thought it was disrespectful to my family. Trading them to my drug dealer was perfectly acceptable in my mind. It's not disrespectful. The insanity of addiction, right? How the mind works.
Right.
So the guy shows up at my house. He delivers. I was a high-class addict.
Yeah.
If there is that, I was a very important addict.
That's right, yeah.
Well, I hate that term. I was a very important person suffering from substance use issues. But I take the cocaine, I give him the tickets, I run up to my office, I dump it out on my desk looking at it like I'm Scarface, this cocaine kingdom, I want to go, little nose there. I of course have to do some. But at this point, cocaine had long stopped allowing me to feel like I love myself. Now it only intensified the feelings of self-loathing and hatred and depression. And you switch dealers, you try new alcohol, you switch from wine to Jack Daniels to Grey Goose or whatever, all thinking that's the answer, right? Not about recovery. But there's also, with long-term cocaine addiction, you can be paranoid. And I started to get paranoid, thinking I hear the cops outside, the SWAT team. I hide the cocaine in a closet. I drive to Home Depot, I buy electrical faceplate outlets, a drill, and a saw. I drive back to my house. I go to each closet, the drywall in my house, and drill a fake electrical outlet in each closet, the drywall. I put the cocaine in separate Ziploc baggies and put it behind each fake electrical outlet like I was doing the most brilliant thing ever. Like the cops, the DEA, and the drug dogs have never seen that one before, right?
Right.
I was brilliant. How the mind works in addictions.
Right.
Of course, I have to do some more. And just the same thing, just intensified pain and shame, just chasing that high, chasing that feeling of self-love, which was only going to come at this point through recovery. But I didn't know that yet. I get paranoid again. I go back to each closet. I take all the cocaine out, put it back in the Ziploc baggie, and I flush it down the toilet. Now it's like $980 worth of cocaine because I'd done some.
Right.
The next morning comes, and it's so often when a perceived negative event gets in the rearview mirror when we're dealing with problem drinking or drug use, whether it's a DWI, could take longer, or a relapse, when we say we're never going to do this again. I wake up, I'm an idiot. What did I do? I flushed all this cocaine down the toilet last night. I didn't need to do that. Why did I do that? There's another game tonight. A call to my brother, 2 more tickets, hide it all in the drywall. Of course, I have to do some, and again, just pain, shame. Take it back out again because I'm paranoid, and flush it all down the toilet again. You know the joke, when Dallas flushes, it ends up in Houston. So some people in Houston got really high that night.
That's right.
The quote-unquote insanity of addiction, right? That is what my life had become as a lawyer dealing with alcohol and cocaine at that point in 2006. And my girl who I was dating, her name's Amanda, she's now my wife, knew nothing about these things. She moved in with me, Easter weekend 2007. I'm thinking her moving in with me will be enough to send me to trip me into sobriety. If she moves in with me, I'll stop doing cocaine.
Yeah.
As she moves in with me, I'll stop doing this. I just didn't do it around her.
Right.
I still did it.
Yeah.
And she had her suspicions. And she would tell me later, I had my suspicions. I just couldn't put my finger on it because she didn't know.
Yeah.
She goes away to visit her family, Easter weekend 2007. The next thing I know, it's 2 days later. She's in the house. She's looking down at me. There's cocaine everywhere. There's alcohol everywhere. There's black market Xanax strewn across the counter. She's wondering if she walked into the right house. I'm trying to figure out what lie I can tell to explain this orgy of evidence around her.
Yeah.
She's a lawyer as well.
Yeah.
She wasn't buying any of it. So I had to buy some time to think of a better lie. I said, take me back to Green Oak Psychiatric Facility. Back? You've been to a psychiatric facility? Yeah, there are some things you don't know about my past. We'll talk about that later. Just take me back. So she drives me to Green Oak Psychiatric again, and we're standing in the parking lot, Easter weekend 2007, and a couple of things occurred to me in that parking lot, Eric. One, that she was going to leave. I'd leave. She actually stood by me. Amanda stood by me, and we dated for over a decade while I found recovery, and I repaired the trust that I had broken with her. And I couldn't do it for her. I had to do it for me, because you have to find recovery for yourself, because tragedy happens, people die, things come and go, we lose our family, we lose pets, terrible things happen, and recovery has to withstand those things, right? So you have to do it for you, and not, but it was an impetus. You know, whatever the impetus is for starting is fine.
Right.
And so she stood by me, and we got married, and we've been married for over a year and a half now. So relationships can survive addiction. Not all of them will, but it can happen. But I had to do the work.
Yeah. Brian, I'd really like to get into with you. I know that you've been sober for 11 years
Yes.
or so. And I really want to get into that and in terms of how you got there and all that good stuff. We're going to take a quick break and be back in about 2 minutes. And then I really want to get into that and allow you to kind of tell us how you've kind of overcome and where you are and really get into these books that you've written for.
Sounds good.
Okay. So you guys hang in there, come back. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. Thank you so much for joining us here on Law for the People.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.
Many times we don't understand the law. Law for the People with Eric Cedillo is here to inform, educate, and answer your legal questions. Thank you for tuning in today. From the law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas, Texas. Here's your host, Eric Cedillo.
Hey guys, thank you so much for rejoining us here on Law for the People with your host, me, Eric Cedillo. As always, thank you, Fern, for working the mics and, of course, the video. We're here back with our guest, Brian Cuban. Brian's had an opportunity to kind of tell us the wild ride that he had prior to his discontinuation, I guess, with cocaine
Finding
and
recovery.
alcohol. And you mentioned that occurred after that.
Yeah, Easter weekend 2007.
Yeah.
Standing in that parking lot at my second trip to Green Oaks, waiting for admittance. I don't know why then and not in 2005 when I was suicidal. Who knows why these tipping points happen when they do. I prefer recovery tipping point.
Right.
Because I don't like rock bottom. People say, was that your rock bottom? Because rock bottom assumes that we have to achieve the worst, that the worst has to happen to us to find recovery, when it should be, finding recovery at the earliest point before those things happen.
Yeah.
But in that parking lot, Eric, it finally really dawned on me that my family, the family that loved me so much and I was so close, I was going to lose them.
Yeah.
Not lose their love, because families, we hope, love us unconditionally, but there are probably going to be limits on their willingness to watch us destroy our lives.
Yeah.
They don't want to do that if we're not going to take that first step or try. They have families. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to be hanging around my nieces and nephews on coke and hungover. I wouldn't blame them for not wanting me that. And I knew I had reached that point.
Yeah.
Why then? I don't know. But I decided it was time.
Yeah.
I thought about my father and my brothers, and my father who had raised us to be close all our lives. My father was the middle of three boys, and he raised us to talk to each other, to help each other, to make sure the other brother was okay. It's no accident that my father, Mark, Jeff, and I all live walking distance from each other today, 1,200 miles from Pittsburgh and decades later. That's no accident. It's what my father gave us, the gift of family.
Yeah.
And it was that fear of losing the gift of family that really caused me to say, okay, now it's time. So the next day, I walked into my psychiatrist's office, who I'd been seeing for a couple of years, and lying to just to get antidepressants.
Right.
Now that works well. You're taking antidepressants, drinking, and doing cocaine. And well, why would you lie? Because shame knows no hourly rate, right? I just wasn't ready to open up.
Right.
And that's not unusual, people lying to their therapist. And I finally started getting honest with him about everything but the eating disorder. I was still too ashamed, even though about 25% of all those with eating disorders are men. I bet your readers didn't know
Wow.
that.
Right.
Your listeners didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so he suggested residential treatment, and I was much too important for residential treatment. My ego was still front and center. There are no lawyers in residential treatment, right?
Yeah.
I can't go there. He suggested 12-step, the most well-known for alcohol being Alcoholics Anonymous.
Right.
I can't go to 12-step. I'm an important lawyer. I have no clients left. Excuse me. There was an auto accident down the road. He's going to call me. I'm an important lawyer. Somebody's going to call me any moment.
Yeah.
I waved to him. I threw my card at him. Well, Brian, you have to do something. Well, I can't go to 12-step. And I was resistant. They smoke out there. I see them. I don't smoke. I can't go to 12-step. There's always a reason not to recover, right?
Excuses. Yeah.
I specifically remember telling them I can't go in because they're smokers. But I did have to do something I knew. And more importantly, I wanted to experience one day in my life where I didn't hate myself without having to quell that hatred with drugs and alcohol, which had stopped working
Yeah.
and only intensified that hatred. I just wanted to be able to wake up one morning without a hangover and look in the mirror and love what I saw. Love that Brian, love that little teenage Brian, allow that little teenage Brian to love himself. And I knew that I would have to find some sobriety to make that happen. And so I agreed to go to 12-step, and that I walked into my first meeting, April 8th, 2007. I cried through that meeting, Eric. I sat in the corner. I didn't know if I was a quote-unquote alcoholic. But I did know that my life was a mess. I did know that I wanted one day of loving myself, just one day. And then the next day I'd worry about that. And so at the end of that meeting, they offer what's called a desire chip, a symbol of our desire to stay sober for 24 hours. And I remember crying, and I was smelled. I hadn't showered for days, and I was sweaty. And I went up and I hugged the guy who gave it to me, who ended up becoming my sponsor. And I took it, and April 8th, 2007 was the last time I did cocaine. I took a drink, and also binged and purged.
Yeah.
And so I had 11 years just a couple of weeks ago of long-term recovery.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that simple, because getting sober in meetings don't deal with the baggage of your past. I had to deal with my relationship with my mother.
Yeah.
I had been seeing a therapist for over 15 years. I had been in all kinds of therapy to repair my self-image, to deal with the eating disorder, to deal with that hurt little boy and let him know he was loved. Let him know he is enough. Because I had been dragging that hurt little boy, that bullied little boy around like a chain attached to my ankle with 3 tires, dragging it through life. And it was time to let it go. And I knew the only way to let it go and let him go was through learning to love myself today.
Yeah.
And I am still in that process, loving myself today. I still, people ask me what my biggest recovery struggle is today. It's not alcohol. I don't get triggered by that anymore. It's not cocaine, because I can take cocaine out of the picture. It's still my relationship with food and exercise, because I have to eat,
Yeah.
right? We have to eat to live.
Right.
And so that is still my biggest struggle, but I am still in therapy for that. I view recovery as a day in, day out process,
Yeah.
learning to love myself a little more. And as I learn to love myself a little more, that little boy learns to love himself a little more.
Yeah.
And to me, for me personally, that's what my recovery is about. I have no desire to go back to practicing law. Now I try to use my story to empower people with eating disorders, people struggling with addiction, whether they're lawyers, law students, or anyone, anywhere, that it's scared. It's scared to let them know that, yes, it's scary. That first step is always scary. It really is. I was terrified, but it is worth it. And there is a wonderful life. There is redemption. There is redefining our lives. I have seen the worst happen to people. I have lost friends to overdoses. Friends have gone to prison. I've seen friends lose their license to practice law. And all of that, through all of that, there is one thing is constant. There is one thing that is needed above all else to begin recovery. You have to be above ground. And we have to be above ground. And because of that, today is as good as it's ever going to get to start recovery, because tomorrow is not promised.
It's very true.
And that is the hardest thing I have. That is the most difficult thing I have with lawyers, trying to get them to come to terms with that. Because we are a profession that doesn't like to show vulnerability. We are a profession that thinks we can think our way through something versus getting help, when it's really just manipulating our way through something. Right. And we are a profession that tends to wait for the consequences to catch up to the problem. And those consequences can be dire. I mean, there are a lot worse consequences than losing your license. Right. I know people who have lost their license, who have redefined their lives, and are doing great. Right. There are worse things to happen than that.
No doubt.
And that is why I can't say enough that today is as good as it's ever going to get if you're struggling. Today is as good as it's ever going to get if you know someone who's struggling. We are a profession who we like to mind our own business. You see a colleague in the courtroom acting a little strangely, you're not sure. Maybe everyone knows, or maybe this is someone, maybe you don't know. If I say something, is he going to yell at me? He's going to threaten to sue me for defamation. Shouldn't I just mind my own business? No, we need to stop minding our own business and take care of our profession. Because you don't have to be a counselor. You don't have to have a law degree to use the one tool that everyone has to hopefully empower someone to get help. That's empathy, the ability to say, I noticed something. Are you okay? Yeah. And then ask it again before you leave the conversation. Are you okay again? Because somebody may change their mind within that few seconds and decide to tell you something.
Right.
Don't mind your own business. If a colleague is struggling in the courtroom, I know lawyers who say, look, I've noticed these things. I'm not accusing you of anything. If everything's fine, that's cool. But I want to bring them to your attention before it is put on the record, right, and a judge brings it to your attention. Yeah. If you want to talk to me about it, that's great. If not, you may get someone saying, mind your own business. You may get defensiveness. You may get a lashing out. But that one time when someone says, you're right, I'm struggling, thank you. What can I do? Yeah. It makes it all worth it. It makes it all worth it.
Absolutely. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Really appreciate it. Hopefully the viewers who are listening and watching on YouTube will get some. I enjoyed it when you spoke at SMU, and I certainly enjoyed it today, the story and the history of what it is you're doing.
And if you're a lawyer listening, let me get this in. Texas Lawyers Assistance Program, TLAP. Yeah. I don't care what anyone's told you. They are confidential. Nothing you tell them is getting to the state bar, no matter what wives' tales you've heard. They are confidential.
Yeah, that's wonderful and great information to have. Real quickly before we break, I wanted to mention the two books that you have, and I acquired these. I think I had to go on, was it eBay somewhere to get
eBay. I hope you got them on Amazon.
Amazon. I'm so sorry.
I'm sure you can get them.
My wife actually got it. I said, "Hey, wait."
I mean, I guess they're available on eBay. That's okay.
She got me that one, and then of course Shattered Image. I think I got it.
Shattered Image. I wrote quite a while ago. The Addicted Lawyer will be out a year in June.
Okay, well, wonderful. And then you've got something coming up that
I am working on my third book, which is fiction. Mm-hmm. We were talking about it. Its working title is called The Ambulance Chaser. Don't gig me for that if you're a PI lawyer watching this. It is actually a minor backstory and it does revolve around a lawyer struggling with drugs and alcohol. Yeah. But there is a much larger. It's not the stereotypical type deal, and I don't want to give too much away.
What are we looking at, like a time frame?
A year.
Another year away?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll be looking forward to it. Brian, I want to thank you so much for coming out and talking with us today, and I'm sure the folks listening at home appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Eric. Reach out anytime.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank
Brian.
you.
Guys, thank you so much for joining us here on Law for the People. Remember, here every Friday from 1 to 3, you guys join in, jump in, and tune in. Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful weekend.
Great.
The law offices of Eric Cedillo, a professional corporation, a firm that handles legal matters in personal injury, auto and truck accidents, wrongful death, on-the-job injuries, criminal felony and misdemeanor, family law, divorce, and child custody. The law offices of Eric Cedillo, located at 1725 Greenville Avenue in Dallas at 214-740-1628. That's 214-740-1628. Find them on the web at cedillolaw.com. That's cedillolaw.com.